Okay, well, we're going to be continuing Seth Speaks Chapter 2, and we'll have an opening prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for these few minutes to study these words, and may they lead to greater understanding of our lives and our deep connections with our greater selves and all it is, and God and everything around us, each other, love, all of what's going on in our daily life and our dreams. May this all open up and become more clear to us, harm-free. In the name of Jesus, amen. I am going to briefly review the 5 statements from our previous sessions that we've had. Of course, we started on chapter 1, and the first session ended with the statement, other realities exist. And that opened the door for us to begin to understand some of the deeper aspects, which then the second statement we came up with was, I am a multi-dimensional personality. And then we went on, and then our third statement that we used was, my curiosity allows me to understand my greater self. And then our next session ended with our statement, my greater self is non-physical. And then we continued on, and then another session ended with, telepathy is the basis for my language. And then finally, last week, our statement was, my dreams change my daily life. And we'll pick it up from there. In this book, it's in session 514, starts after the break at 10:44. There's 2 paragraphs, and then we're going to pick it up after that second paragraph. And the first sentence we're going to start with is, whole consciousness adopts various forms. Are you guys with me?
Wait. What page?
No, it's not going to be page. Listen, these are different editions. Session 514. Are you in that session? Okay. I'm going to have to keep going.
Yes.
All right. And then after the break of 10:44, the 2 paragraphs we've already covered. We'll start on the next paragraph in the middle of the page with the word whole, W-H-O-L-E. Whole consciousness adopts various forms. All right. Whole consciousness adopts various forms. It need not always be within a form. All forms are not physical ones. Some personalities, therefore, have never been physical. They have evolved along different lines, and their psychological structures would be alien to your own. To some extent, I also travel through such environments. Consciousness must show itself, however. It cannot unbe. It is not physical. It must therefore show its activation in other ways. In some systems, for example, It forms highly integrated mathematical and musical patterns that are themselves stimuli for other universal systems. I am not very well acquainted with these, however, and cannot speak of them with any great familiarity. If my environment is not a permanently structured one, then, as I told you, neither is your own. If I'm aware of communicating now through Rupert in different ways, each of you telepathically communicates to and through other personalities, though with little knowledge of your accomplishment. And it ends with, now I will end the session. I would sing a lullaby. This is not for the book, for our small friend here, and Sean Watkins, who was nursing again. But I am not in voice for it. My heartiest wishes to you all, a fond good evening. And this is indeed a first and final draft. And they go ahead and part ways. And we're going to continue then on into session 515. It says we will return to our chapter 2. The senses that you use in a very real manner create the environment that you perceive. Your physical senses necessitate the perception of a three-dimensional reality. Consciousness is equipped with inner perceptors, however. These are inherent within all consciousness, regardless of its development. These perceptors operate quite independently from those that might be assumed when a given consciousness adopts a specialized form, such as a physical body, in order to operate in a particular system. Each reader, therefore, had inner senses and to some extent uses them constantly, though he is not aware of doing so at an egotistical level. Now, we use the inner senses quite freely and consciously. If you were to do so, then you would perceive the same kind of environment in which I have my existence. You would see an uncamouflaged situation in which events and forms were free and not stuck in a jelly-like mold of time. You could see, for example, your present living room not only as a conglomeration of permanent appearing furniture, but switch your focus and see the immense and constant dance of molecules and other particles that compose the various objects. You could see a phosphorescent-like glow, the aura of the electromagnetic structure that composes the molecules themselves. You could, if you wished, condense your consciousness until it was small enough to travel through a single molecule, and from the molecule's own world look out and survey the universe of the room and the gigantic galaxy of interrelated, ever-moving star-like shapes. Now, all of these possibilities represent a legitimate reality. Yours is no more legitimate than any other, but it is the only one that you perceive. Using the inner senses, we become conscious creators, co-creators. But you are unconscious co-creators, whether you know it or not. If our environment seems unstructured to you, it is only because you do not understand the true nature of order, which has nothing to do with permanent form, but only appears to have from your perspective. There is no 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 9 o'clock in the evening in my environment. By this I mean that I am not restricted to a time sequence. There is nothing preventing me from experiencing such sequences if I choose, We experience time, or what you would call its equivalent nature, in terms of intensities of experience, a psychological time with its own peaks and valleys. This is somewhat similar to your own emotional feelings, when time seems speeded up or slowed down. But it is vastly different in important ways. Our psychological time could be compared in terms of environment to the walls of a room. But in our case, the walls would be constantly changing in color, size, height, depth, and width. Our psychological structures are different, practically speaking, in that we consciously utilize a multidimensional psychological reality that you inherently possess but are unfamiliar with at an egotistical level. It is natural, then, that our environment would have multidimensional qualities that the physical senses would never perceive. Now, I project a portion of my reality, as I dictate this book, to an undifferentiated level between systems that is relatively clear of camouflage. It is an inactive area, comparatively speaking. If you were thinking in terms of physical reality, then this area could be likened to one immediately above the atmosphere of your Earth. However, I am speaking of psychological and psychic atmospheres, and this area is sufficiently distant from Rupert's physically oriented self so that the communications can be relatively understood. It is also in a way distant from my own environment, for in my own environment I would have some difficulties in relating information in physically oriented terms. You must understand that by distance, I do not refer to space. Creation and perception are far more intimately connected than any of your scientists realize. It is quite true that your physical senses create the reality that they perceive. A tree is something far different to a microbe, a bird, an insect, and a man who stands beneath it. I'm not saying that the tree only appears to be different. It is different. You perceive its reality through one set of highly specialized senses. This does not mean that its reality exists in that form in any more basic way than it exists in the form perceived by the microbe, insect, or bird. You cannot perceive the quite valid reality of that tree in any context but your own. This applies to anything within the physical system that you know. It is not that physical reality is false. It is that the physical picture is simply one of an infinite number of ways of perceiving the various guises through which consciousness expresses itself. The physical senses force you to translate experience into physical perceptions. The inner senses open your range of perception, allow you to interpret experience in a far freer manner, and to create new forms and new channels through which you or any consciousness can know itself. Consciousness is, among other things, a spontaneous exercise in creativity. You are learning now in a three-dimensional context the ways in which your emotional and psychic existence can create varieties of physical form. You manipulate within the psychic environment, and these manipulations are then automatically impressed upon the physical mold. Now, our environment is in itself creative in a different manner than yours. Your environment is creative in that trees bear fruit, that there is a self-sustaining principle, that the earth feeds its own, for example. The naturally creative aspects are the materializations of the deepest psychic, spiritual, and physical inclinations of the race, set up in your terms eons ago, and a part of the racial bank of psychic knowledge. All right, we're going to stop there. There's been some important statements that have to sort of be reviewed here before we can decide on our sentence. All right, the first sentence of this session states the senses that you use in a very real manner create the environment that you perceive. And then he talks about inner senses and how that in his world he's using the inner senses, and he tried to give us through an analogy and understanding of what that might mean. And then after the break, he repeats again. After the break at 9:56, he says, the first sentence, creation and perception are far more intimately connected than any of your scientists realize. And then he went on to explain that imagine an insect that sees a tree, that perceives a tree. Okay. Well, when we look at a tree, we automatically assume that the tree is what we see. That's its normal form, that's the way it is. And that if an insect sees the tree, it'll see it in a different manner, but that actually we know that the tree is really the way we see it. Okay. That's not true according to Seth. He says that what's happening is whatever consciousness perceives that tree is not only perceiving it, but also in a sense creating it, and that is a separate normal creation and true reality of that tree. Apparently the true essence of the tree can be seen in different forms by different consciousness, and in that sense the way you perceive it then gives you sort of a snapshot of the tree, but it's not like we're seeing the true essence of the tree. So whatever consciousness it is, whether it's the microbe, the insect, an animal like or a bird, or us, and looks at a tree, we all are seeing a different tree because the perception is different, and each one of them is legitimate. He wants it to be clear that ours is no more legitimate than the others. It doesn't mean it's any less either, but he wants us to try to expand our minds and get past the idea that we're the ones who know everything and just everything else is sort of beneath us. Finally, I think the important sentence is on the first paragraph on this page where we stop. It says, consciousness is, among other things, a spontaneous exercise in creativity. And so consciousness is more than that, but that's what we want to come up with. So the sentence we're going to focus in on is on the first paragraph here where we stopped. Consciousness is, among other things, a spontaneous exercise in creativity, and we want to put that into a personal statement. So if you say my consciousness, okay, one of the important things to understand there, the reason that that's important is because consciousness actually is a tool that an aspect of us uses. So that means that we are even more than our consciousness. So if you follow me there, we are more than our consciousness, in this case, it's adopting the physical form that I would call Bill. And as my consciousness that is Bill is interacting in physical reality, in this case, the consciousness in physical reality, and apparently wherever it is a spontaneous exercise in creativity. So I just think we need to